Welcome back. It's no secret that the world is still grappling with climate change. But of the Caribbean countries, the Bahamas is the most vulnerable because of archipelagic nature. That's why stakeholders from both the private and public sector are teaming up with the National Emergency Management Agency and the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency for a 5-day workshop to develop a national plan for the country to prepare for the worst. Our Candia Smith picks up the details from here.
Our tourism, agriculture, and marine resources industries are all vulnerable to climate change, and so far the Bahamas, like other Caribbean countries, is already experiencing coastal erosion. Not to mention increased temperatures, reduced average rainfall, increased sea surface temperatures, and the potential for more fierce tropical storms and hurricanes. Little wonder why the National Emergency Management Agency and the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency feel it necessary to host the Climate Smarting and Enhancement of CDM Country Work Program. The 5-day workshop will focus on securing the future for the region in the wake of climate change. Environment Minister Kenry Dorset.
The effects of climate change will be great and have the potential to drastically change the lives we live now. With continued coastal and beach erosion and the rising sea level, our tourism product will be threatened. The livelihood of almost every fisherman and farmer will be threatened, and thereby our food security. The quality of water and its availability is also threatened. In the Bahamas, these threats are almost all replicated on each island and key. Covering over 100,000 square miles, our work to mitigate the effects of climate change must be replicated throughout the length and breadth of the Bahamas. This makes it that much more challenging for us and much more necessary that we intervene now.
But Minister Dorset says the government is not sitting idly by.
The government has begun the process of identifying vulnerable areas through the Bahamas and intends to enforce land use and building code policies. The Bahamas Environmental Science and Technology Commission and the Ministry of Works and Urban Development are tasked with monitoring the implementation and enforcement of these policies supported by legislation. The Bahamas National Geographic Information Systems, BINGIS, for which I am also Minister, will assist the mentioned agencies with the execution of these responsibilities through collaborating and supplying spatial data and maps.
Over the next 5 days, the participants will engage in discussions that will include key terms, enhance the understanding of vulnerability, and the development of the country work plan. Minister Dorset said at the end of the day, this workshop will benefit the ministries of tourism, health, agriculture, and education. Candia Smith, JCN News.
Well, in other news this evening, Cuban protesters in Miami may have intensified their demonstrations against the Bahamas, but a top cabinet minister assures that those protests have no impact on the country and there has been no fallout. Miami-based Cuban exile group Democracy Movement has been protesting against the Bahamas for several months now after allegations surfaced that Defense Force officers had severely abused Cuban detainees at the Jamaica Road Detention Center. The group, headed by Ramon Sanchez, has protested against all Bahamas-bound cruise ships. It has also taken its plight outside the Bahamas Consulate office in Miami.
My judgment is there has been no impact and there is no fallout. I say again, this is a matter which is largely confined to Dade County and Broward County in Miami. It is driven in part by the continued fascination which the local press appears to have for this matter. And really giving these people more light than they deserve. The fact is that they have engaged in what appears to be economic blackmail of this country, and we simply can't support it on that basis, those are just the facts.
Well, tempers flared among Democracy Movement officials after a Bahamian newspaper released a report purporting to prove that Cuban detainees were in fact abused. Foreign Affairs Minister Fred Mitchell has repeatedly stressed that the investigation into the alleged abuse is not complete. Now, when asked when that would be the case, he said, quote, "It's a matter with the National Security Ministry, and they'll be able to tell you the way forward." Well, Minister Mitchell and a Bahamian delegation are in New York today for the 68th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Minister Mitchell heads the delegation until Prime Minister Perry Christie arrives in New York on a Friday. Mr. Christie will deliver the country's national statement to the General Assembly for the first time as Prime Minister. His address is scheduled for Saturday at 3 p.m.
The annual gathering in New York is the opportunity for nations to exchange views, both bilaterally and in the multilateral context, on a number of important issues. Of particular interest to the Bahamas will be the high-level dialogues on migration, on the Millennium Development Goals, and on sustainable development. In this context, there will be a number of meetings with agencies in the UN responsible for migration matters. This will also be an opportunity for the Bahamas to continue to make the case in the national statement for a global governance infrastructure for the regulation and support of the financial services sector, and to continue to make the case for small island developing states and the adverse effects of climate change.
Minister for Social Services and Community Development Melanie Griffin will also attend the General Assembly on Tuesday. The Bahamas will become a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, joining Caribbean community countries such as Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Jamaica, Dominica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Grenada.
It's a very significant and actually historic time for persons with disabilities in the Bahamas. The Bahamas will be signing on to the United Nations Convention, and this, of course, sets the stage for the upcoming legislation which we expect to put before Parliament very shortly and have passed before the end of the year. There will be provisions from the convention, of course, that will be, the convention actually gives teeth to the legislation.
Well, bring on the investments. With the local economy still not where it used to be, many Bahamians are waiting with bated breath on the thousands of jobs set to come on stream if and when the government's promised projects take root. Well, our Sasha Liborn recently spoke to a cabinet minister directly involved in making that happen. We go now to that report.
Outside of Bahama, scheduled to open in December next year, one may say that very few investment projects, if any, are happening throughout the country. But Minister of Investment Kalish Roll begs to differ. Mr. Roll has made several trips throughout the world, including China and London, all in an effort to bring investments to the Bahamas. And it's something he says will manifest itself over time.
There's still a lot of activities taking place on the investment front, but many of these projects are in the developmental phase. People are signing contracts, they are closing deals. We just recently agreed to the sale of the Nassau Palm. Redevelopment is taking place there now. They have demolition taking place, and then you will start to see the build out.
That's right on Nassau Street?
Right on Nassau Street. And coupled with that facility there, they're looking at developing another facility. I'm having many conversations, shepherding quite a number of deals. We're about to make another major announcement next week sometime for the southwest quadrant of the island, which will be another $200 million.
But will those projects translate into jobs?
It's a process. When you're building a house, you have to go through a process. You don't just automatically say, I want a house, and you walk out the door and the house is there. You have to go through a process. And if someone can show me realistically a better way of building a house that would give it to you immediate, I'd be happy to pay them for it.
Mr. Roll says once several projects get off the ground, Bahamians will be able to apply for jobs, and the government will push for Bahamians to be given first preference when hiring. For JCN News, I'm Sasha Lightborn.
With that, we wrap up this segment of our news. Stay with us for a check on sports and weather.